Welcome to a new episode of the Cartridge Club, where we discuss our game of the month with members of the Cartridge Club community. If you played along, you can always share your own experiences in the forums at cartridgeclub.org, in our community's Discord, or across social media by using the hashtag PlayAlongWithPrime. If you're familiar with the show, you may already know me as Musty Hobbit, and I am one of the hosts. This episode will be focused on our December 2019 Game of the Month, Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. Joining us for this month's discussion are two newcomers to CC Prime, Dan from Winterion Game Studios, and Brian, aka Briz, from the OffKillter podcast. This show will contain spoilers for the game, and in the description I've noted the exact times that you'll want to skip over if you intend to keep the biggest moments of KOTOR a surprise. So with that, let's dive into this Star Wars tale, and may the Force be with you. I almost feel like this game rides on its characters. I mean, it kind of has to. It is one of the more character-driven RPGs that I've ever played. What do you guys like? Who's your favorite character? Dan, let's start with you.
Normally in stories like this, and I'm a little bit biased because my early experience with Star Wars is actually more from the tabletop RPG than it is the movies or any of the film stuff. Probably T3. If only because I specifically remember the quest where you have to pick somebody to bust you out after your ship's being commandeered.
Yes.
And that there's sort of that simultaneous, like, you're treated very differently when you're doing it from the droid's perspective, right? It's like a whole different world thing. And only you realize that you're really as skilled as you are. It's kind of a fun way to sort of subvert when you're a Jedi or a Sith, you're this huge, larger than life, hero or villain, as it were. You're still capable so much as a droid, but the world around you treats you so differently. And I always thought that was really interesting.
That is really interesting.
I like that.
I kind of came at Star Wars from the other side of the spectrum. So I was a huge fan of the original movies as a kid and never played any sort of RPGs or anything like that. I played like the Super Nintendo Star Wars games and that sort of thing. I never played a game like this that's based on like D&D kind of rules. So the all the stuff about roles and saves and stuff was so new to me. I had to figure it out at first, but I was actually really surprised to hear you say T3 because in my mind he was like such a lackluster character. I guess I just didn't use him enough or something. Um, but I was gonna say Jolie uh, because he just has that cool old crotchety guy that he's got that attitude where he doesn't really care what you think. I also appreciate the fact that he's kind of pragmatic in his force use. Like he's not super light side or super dark side. He's just kind of like in the middle somewhere. So I liked him, and I liked like the little comments that he'd jump in with every once in a while.
Good choice. That's a good choice. And two characters that you get, midway into your quest. I feel like a lot of people's answer to this question, my answer some days would be HK-47, just because he's written so well.
Yeah,
Uh, and I really like how especially if you're playing Dark Side, he really like it. And I having just played Light Side and for this month. I really didn't get a ton of this, but just the way that he talks down to you as an individual, it feels, I don't know, it feels good, which is very strange to say. Like, just the way that he deals with humans in general is a lot
Yeah.
of fun. But I think I'm going to say I like Bastila. I don't know if it's a Jennifer Hale thing.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know. I mean, I realized there was like 4 or 5 games with her in it this year that I played. Um, I really like her, and that's why it saddens me, like how things went. We'll get to that eventually, but
Hmm.
there's some stuff that I need to talk about what happens with her character that really bothered me. But we'll get into that as we go through here. So um, obviously for the Cartridge Club, again, we were playing Knights of the Republic, and this was not my first time playing the game, and I don't believe it was either of your first time playing the game. But do you have any recollection? Do you remember when you dove into the game for the first time? Like what aside from the Star Wars name, was there anything else that caused you to get pulled into uh, this epic?
Actually, the first time I tried this game, it was shortly after it came out. A friend of mine had it and loved it and tried to get me to play it. So he loaned it to me and I tried it and I played for about 20 minutes and I was like, what is this? Like, I was so used to just straight up action games, where you could kind of button mash and slash people with your lightsaber. So the first time I got into combat and the screen paused, I was like, what's going on? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around this sort of real time with pause, with dice roll in the background combat. And it also threw me off because I was such a huge fan of the movies, and this being set so far back in history, everything's very different. So it didn't look like the Star Wars that I knew. So I tried to play this game for maybe half an hour, and I was like, this is just not for me. And I gave it back to my friend. And it took me probably like 4 or 5 months after that, where it was just getting heaps and heaps of praise. I was like, all right, I should try this again. Went back at it with a fresh perspective, and the second time it really hooked me. It was especially the um, characters that were so well written and had such good backstories that they kind of give you breadcrumbs, as you go through the game. You learn a little bit more and a little bit more. And that, I think, is the aspect that really hooked me, and just finally getting my head around that weird kind of combat that I wasn't used to.
Dan, what sort of memories do you have of like your first time with this one?
So I actually watched someone play KOTOR before I got a chance to play it myself. A good friend of mine from outside of Baltimore had it for Xbox, and he and I had both grown up playing a whole lot of RPGs together. I have memories of he and his brother and me playing through Secret of Mana using the multi-tap for hours upon hours on end. So it wasn't weird for me to like go visit him and see him playing an RPG. I was surprised when he was playing one on Xbox. That's a system I associated with things like Crimson Skies and Xbox Live and Halo. Um, and then the second thing that really blew my mind is I watched and I immediately realized what the combat system was. It was the D20 system, which was fairly new at the time, right around the turn of the century. It come out third edition of D&D. And I'd started working at a game store in 2001, so I was intimately familiar with third edition D&D. I'd been selling a lot of the books. People were running those games, all the time. And I was intrigued that there was basically a video game RPG that was using that system. I'd known that BioWare had done, the Baldur's Gate stuff using the old second edition D&D. Not to get too into the weeds about it yet, but I was never really a fan of pre-third edition mechanics, THAC0 and all that. So I was really excited to see an implementation of third ed, especially in something other than the base D&D setting. So that's kind of what prompted me to jump into it. Although I did so through the PC rather than the Xbox. and my initial experience was actually pretty buggy. I ran into lots of issues where my save wouldn't work anymore, or I had problems. And this was before we had a lot of patches coming available. So I actually let the game sit a little bit. Came back to it later, but once I was in, I was hooked, and I played clear through on a light side build.
Very nice. I wanted to start light side, and then I kept getting tested. I felt so one of the beautiful things about this game is one of those games that introduces that sort of binary nature of here's a choice. Your choice is going to have an impact, and your impact then drives your character in one direction or the other. And I went into it with intentions of being full light side, and it's so expensive to be so good. Because I recall, I think the first time I played through it, I think I went dark side the whole way because I think my friend had said like you'll have a ton of fun if you go in this direction. You'll have a lot more, but many more credits and all of these things. But the cooler powers apparently, rumor has it, are locked behind that. Now, I was telling myself until this month, until this playthrough, I thought I had finished this game. I was fairly certain that I had, and I did not. Like
What?
I don't know why that is. Like I don't know if if I lost it, but there's stuff that I saw that I was like, I don't remember this.
Hmm.
So either and I don't think it's a light side dark side thing. Like think that I think that for some reason I never finished this game when I was younger, and they're back in the mid 2000s. And I have no reason to justify it.
Was
No
that
excuse.
was that just like you thought you'd finished it and you
I
put it
thought
away,
so.
or
I knew. I mean, I I knew the big thing, which we'll
Right.
talk about eventually.
Sure.
I knew the big moment, and then for some reason I had thought that I had but that like as I played through it, like just that last stretch, even the unknown world, like I didn't recognize any of that. So I don't know what happened. I don't know why I didn't finish it. Like it dawned on me mid playthrough that I'm like I have not finished this game. It's very scary, but no, I had a blast playing it then, and funny enough, we were playing the version of um, tabletop Star Wars RPG because they started to print the books. I had a group that was doing that, and then when the same friend who was GMing for us was like, "Dude, it's here. I don't even have to do anything. They already have a story." Like I'm like, "That's amazing." And being an Xbox guy at the time, it was like, "Well, I have no reason not to pick this up." And then strange me not finishing the game. I don't know. I it amazes me to see how much of this game like is reflected in the stuff that BioWare has done since then. Like the Dragon Age is probably the biggest example I can think of. Do either of you find that there are other games that maybe aren't BioWare developed that have sort of adopted this KOTOR approach to combat, storytelling, etc.? Dan, I want to start with you if possible.
I'm gonna be honest. I hope not. And I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. I love BioWare as authors. I think they do a great job writing story, and I think the systems they develop for their combat, the sort of the balance and the way they interact with the narrative works well. I really hate pausing and starting combat constantly, and that breakup and that flow made going through the great stories of Baldur's Gate a chore. Made Dragon Age something I really didn't even want to play. Mass Effect, thank goodness for the wheel to quick select things because if not for that, I may have been turned off of that series, and that was an excellent 3 games of narrative to go through.
Hmm.
There's something so disjointed about a game that can't decide if it wants to be turn-based or real time, especially when the difficulty of the game is high enough to justify the constant pausing, but the flow of the game functions better when you're allowing it to run. It's actually one of the reasons that in KOTOR, I have a certain build that I like to go through the game on. It's not a min-max build by any stretch of the imagination, but it does make combat fairly quick and straightforward, which means I can play it without much pausing. And that greatly heightens my enjoyment of the game because when I'm being a little too strategic with Knights of the Old Republic, when I'm playing more of a caster build or a scoundrel, um, yeah, I end up disliking the fights a lot more just by virtue of not enjoying the way that they're played out mechanically. Um, I do think that, especially from the narrative, I guess you want to call it like a binary morality system, or just sort of narrative arcs that take variables based on your behavior and use that to guide you through either mechanical changes in your character, physical appearance changes in your character, um, or advancement, locking things out, making things available. I think that stuff's excellent, and games would be wise to learn from that model because oftentimes a lot of games allow you to build a character a certain way with no real concern for how you're acting in the game. And I think that's one of the best things Knights of the Republic does is it ties in what you're saying and what you're doing and sort of how you function as a PC through that.
I like that. Brian, do you agree?
I agree with a lot of what you said, but I personally I feel like I kind of go back and forth on the whether you pause a lot and choose your strategies versus you know reducing the amount of interruptions and kind of making it a better flow. Sometimes I like the tactical pausing and telling this guy to use this spell on this guy and with Dragon Age Origins, like I did that through the entire game and I loved it. I had each guy had its own role. I went, how like when your companion levels up, you can go in there and pick everything you want, or you can just say auto level this guy up. I don't want to do it. In Dragon Age, I went through every single character and built them exactly how I wanted them, and I spent that time, played the game for like 70 hours. But when I was playing through KOTOR recently, I just did not have the patience for that, and so I'm just auto leveling up. And when I got into combat, I would sometimes like to just control my character and just let combat play out, but I found it too difficult to do that most of the time. Like I had to go in and try to use crowd control and make sure people are attacking the same target and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes I like that and sometimes I don't. It just kind of depends on my mood. But in terms of any other developers that are making anything like that, I can't really think of any other than maybe the most recent game. I think it's from Spiders, Greedfall. I might have that developer wrong, but I haven't played it, but I hear it has that sort of companion system with the deep backstories for them and morality choices and stuff. But other than that, I can't really think of any other developers that make the same kind of game.
I can't either. But to speak to the pausing, I think that's a good point to click onto. In this playthrough, I remember the first time I went through. I think I was very light on the pausing, and I was trying to do as much of that in real time as possible. I don't know how I even got past the first world, Taurus. Uh, there is the last fight that you have in Taurus is super difficult, and I picked the wrong party. Like I picked the wrong people to bring along for that one.
Mhm.
Because in that situation, and I realize we're jumping in without really introducing any of the characters, but there is a Mandalorian who's no longer sports the awesome armor that is now standard for Mandalorians, but Canderous, and he sets you up with some I don't know if he's a smuggler. He's some kind of like mob boss type person who has a ship that we can take to get off world. And he's like, "You'll come with me. We'll pretend to be new people working for him." and then we can bring one other person. I'm like, ooh, you know what? There's going to be doors. We might have some locks to deal with. So I brought T3 of everyone. I brought T3. So I had to do that fight with T3 and underleveled Canderous and myself, who was a melee fighter, and you have to fight against both against him and the bounty
Callow
hunter.
Nord.
Callow Nord.
Yeah.
That was
I just
brutal. It was so brutal. And so I learned that was kind of the moment that it was like, pause the game, take the time. Like I queued up that fight with us throwing every grenade that I had. It's just like, I don't care, just keep going. So I had all three. I have all three. Three throw grenades. Yeah, he can throw grenades. I had everyone just lobbing grenades at those guys because I had no way to get me, the vibro blade wielding fighter at that point, close.
Yeah.
Yeah, it worked. It took me a few times. Pretty frustrated. There were a few battles like that like if it wasn't for pausing and wasn't for that, I would have been toast. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Terrace is um, among the trickier places in the game just because part of it is the way they scale the game, and part of it is just the D20 system in general. There's sort of a weird non-linear growth model in the game. Especially there's a second big time jump, right, when you go from characters without force powers to characters with them. But just sort of that slow initiation, the first few levels of growth, strength wise, um, getting off of Terrace is huge. Once you hit that point, there's sort of a point where your character growth and your abilities grow faster than the world around you does. And things start to, for the most part, getting easier at that point. But yeah, it's weird because normally in most RPGs and most sort of narrative-based games like this that give you the characters to build up over time, right? The idea is they start you out easy and build you up to bigger and bigger challenges because you're supposed to be developing mastery with the game. Um, but since a lot of this is unknowing and understanding D20, it actually kind of starts out harder and gets easier um, through your mastery, but it's weird that it should be that way. You know, you think it'd be the other way around normally in a game.
Yeah, I mean, you'd want games to be welcoming,
Yeah.
and I think I know a number of people who've been like, I couldn't manage.
Now the ship is good. When you're escaping off of at the very beginning when you wake up. But once you've landed on Terrace after those first couple of quests, especially once you go down to the sub levels, it gets pretty ugly pretty quick.
Well, there are a few moments in the Black Volcar base that are, if you're not if you either lack skills, which depending on how you've built your character, you could have absolutely no computer use whatsoever. I think I had a -1 computer use for the entire game, because I started as a soldier. Did what? So Dan, you mentioned you have like a preferable build
Yeah.
for your main
So
character. I'm curious as to what that is because I went soldier because I wanted, knowing what I know about this game and
right.
knowing that I would become a Jedi. I was like, I want to use a lightsaber.
Okay.
So I'm not going to be a scout. I'm not going to be a scoundrel either. As like I just want to melee fight.
Yeah,
That's what I want.
and I do the same usually. So my build is light side guardian, two weapon, flurry and speed, persuasion, and treat injury. Um, treat injury with the med kits is actually really good healing, and you can find enough of them if you dig around over time that it can kind of substitute for a healer early on. And in a pinch, it's much more responsive than asking another Jedi to heal you later. Um, Besides, they can spend their time attacking or using any of the force buffs in the game. The other advantage with D20, just by the nature of the system, is when you do get weapons, there's mods for weapons, right? And especially with the lightsabers, the ability to mod those, there's a lot of things that have static bonuses, not ranged bonuses or bonuses that scale with the weapon, but static bonuses to hit, bonuses to damage. Once those bonuses exist, attacking more often immediately triggers those bonuses more often. So flurry, speed, and multiple weapons, you're compounding those static bonuses, and that leads to just very high consistent damage. It takes a little time to ramp up. So yes, you do have a little challenge early in Terrace. You may need to level up a little bit before leaving it. But once you've done that, you start to kind of coast the amount of damage you can put out and the speed you put it out. There's a couple other things you need. You need leap to close distances. You may want a rank a throw lightsaber or some other things. But for the most part, just as many attacks as you can throw out and around is the way to go, I find.
The first time I played, I just kind of lucked into going soldier. I didn't, I wasn't really thinking about it ahead of time, but you're right. Like later in the game, once you get that lightsaber, it's like I'm not going to switch back to a blaster. So it's good to have all that strength and constitution, so you can just get up in there and wreck people. And my first playthrough, I went guardian as well. So I was just trying to get. I was pushing out as much damage as I could. I I was new to this sort of D20 system. I had never played in you know what do you call it, D&D or live action, whatever. So I was new to this concept, so I didn't really understand the min maxing aspect of it, or how things compound with each other. I was just kind of picking what I thought was cool and what seemed to work, and I eventually just had like a 2 or 3 skill set that I would just roll through. I would like force push and then do like a leaping attack or something, and then I'd run away and do do the same thing again. It was probably kind of hilarious to somebody that actually knew what was going on, but it was effective, so I went with it. In my most recent playthrough, I kind of, it's been so long since I'd played it before. I just kind of went in fresh and didn't really think about what I was going to do in the end. And I actually did pick a scoundrel. I was like, "Oh, it's Star Wars. I'll be a cool scoundrel. I'll dual wield blasters." And then of course I got to a Jedi again. I was like, you know what? I hate blasters again. So this time I was going with a dual wielding um, lightsabers, but up to that point I had kind of put a lot of points in demolitions and other things like that, awareness. So my current character is not as good as it should be, which kind of led to me having to do a lot of that, pausing the combat and assigning actions to everybody to make sure we weren't all dying. But yeah, if anybody hasn't played this and they're thinking about playing it, I might say go soldier and just put all your stuff into melee.
Well, like I know that in D&D there is a feat called weapon finesse, and it
Mm.
doesn't exist in this game. And weapon finesse swaps your to hit and damage with melee weapons with your dex bonus.
Yeah, so weapon finesse basically allows you to use light or finesse weapons. You essentially use your dex mod instead of your strength mod with them. They
There you go.
did add it for the sequel.
Mm.
Yes, yeah. So initially, that would have been great for what you were doing, Brian. Right?
Yeah.
If you were coming in with blasters, then all of a sudden you got to kind of rewrite everything. There's plenty of ways to counter that. You do get some boost to your attributes throughout the game, as you would in a normal D20 style campaign, but you are limited. You only gain 20 levels max in this game. Uh, I found, and I don't know if this is just for those who are maybe, I I found myself saving levels, saving the leveling for the moments when I needed it, for all my characters. Um, Especially in the late game, I found that because the moment that if you pause to level, uh, and you just do one level, it refills your health
Right.
instantly. So it's a free heal on those guys, and I found myself, at least the party that I had the most was myself as the two lightsaber wielding Jedi Guardian, uh, light side, and then HK-47, and then uh, whichever of the quote light side Jedi I had with me, whichever ones I could have with me, and so uh, they didn't heal very well. HK can't be healed by force healing,
Right, repair kit.
and it should be noted. Force healing existed long before everyone else was talking about force healing. Do you guys have a favorite party to bring with? Like, did you always stick with the same people, or did you like to mix it up as well?
I'd say I probably had 3 characters that I stuck with the most, which were Karth, Bastila, and Jolie. But I did like to mix it up based on where I was going. So, like, if I was going to Kashyyyk, I brought Zalbar with me, and if I was bringing him, I would usually bring what's the Twi'lek's name? I forget. I'm blanking.
Mission.
Because they were a pair, so I like them to hang out or whatever. If I was taking HK with me, I might bring Canderous because they're both kind of dark characters. I felt like they would get along. So like I'm like projecting emotions onto these pre-programmed characters.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm like matchmaking. So I mixed it up, but I stuck with probably Bastila and Karth the most, just because they're who you start with. So I kind of felt like me, Karth, and Bastila were like Luke, Han, and Leia. You know what I mean? And the other characters were kind of our little gang of henchmen or whatever.
That makes sense.
No, I get it, and I have some similar vibes. So I'm pretty traditionalist when I play RPGs, and yeah, both Karth and Bastila are so central, right? They feel like such main characters that I really didn't remove them unless I had to, or I didn't have them available for some reason, or if I needed to splash one character in or out for some reason or another. Um, I would usually try to skill max on characters like T3 and missions, so they were really good specialists if I knew I needed them for one section or another. um, I'll admit I didn't do as much bringing characters along for narrative reasons in subsequent playthroughs. Like the first time, absolutely. The first time I went through the game, it was very much, is this the place the character should go? Um, but because after that first playthrough, you start to learn a lot about how the different worlds work and what happens in them. A lot of the content, you can kind of get away with using your favorites, and then you just start building them to sort of synergize with each other and sort of that tank healer DPS hybrid model. Um, Juhani and Jolie, I found made the game a little too easy. Just because the three of them as a build, when you have three really well spec'd melee lightsaber users out there together, there's very little that doesn't just drop. So if I get stuck on a particularly challenging part, I can always switch to that. But usually at that point in the game, nothing is posing too great a risk, so I tended to stick with my base party.
I want to talk about Johnny for a second because I made a fatal mistake, and she was not with me for any of this game.
Wow.
Tragic.
And yeah, I just want to briefly touch on the fact that I was trying to talk to her. So the first time that you meet Johanny, so you've sort of been forced out of this main planet. Let me kind of set the stage here. You've been forced away from this initial planet because the Sith fleet has decided to start bombarding the planet of Taurus, and you, having just rescued a Jedi named Bastila, um, she senses something about you is special and decides to take you to Dantooine. In questing on Dantooine, you come across Juhani, who's a uh, extremely conflicted dark side user. Who's is she causing more problems, or like somebody tells you to just go bring her back, right? Like they want her back at the temple to kind of.
I believe the quest was clear the taint at the grove, or the darkness at the grove, or something like that.
It was taint. I'm pretty sure it was taint. But I went there, talked to her, and I got down to the conversation, and some of the points that I was making was like, you should go back. Things are okay. You can, you can come back from this. And uh, she wasn't responsive to anything. So I was like, well, I've exhausted every single every single option here. I've said all the right, what I feel like is all the right things. So I'm gonna pick the other option. And she's like, I guess it's death then. And then she fought me, and I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? I was supposed to walk away. I think I was supposed to just leave her, and then she would come, like she would join me later. I think is how things were supposed to go, and I ended up offing her, which I didn't have a choice. Like it was really it was frustrating because I'm like, do I need to reload a save? And I think it would have been, that was the point before I started liberally saving. So I would have lost like an hour easily in that instant. I was just like, come on, like, oh well, I guess we're just not going to have this person with me. So be it.
I think that's kind of a cool feature, though, right? It's like, based on your actions, this one character that could have been with you throughout like 40 hours of gameplay just did not exist at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of neat.
It's not the first time games have done that, right? You've got first example always comes to my mind is Shadow in Final Fantasy VI, right? Character really cool, really interesting, conflicted character. There's lots of cool backstory that you can completely miss if you don't wait on the floating continent, if you don't happen to go to inns and sleep and see those flashbacks and the like. And there's really no in-game cue to tell you those things or to warn you. There's no flag that says, hey, you're about to lose a potential PC for the rest of the game. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes/no. Um, is sometimes it's just a thing you have to learn, be disappointed, look up on game facts, find out you were wrong, and get it right the next time through.
A big face palm right there. Just
Yeah.
I
right.
think it's cool though that in KOTOR you can do that and you can still finish the game, right? There's games like Morrowind where you can kill like an important character and then it's just like, well, you can keep playing if you want, but the game's basically unwinnable at this point.
You have lost the main quest.
Yeah. So I think it's cool that they at least had flexibility in that, yeah, you can lose this character forever, but it's not the end of the world. You can keep going.
Yeah. I found myself mourning a character that I might not have even used at all in my party. It was just
Well, you only get like 9 characters, right? So
Yeah.
losing one it's a big chunk.
Mhm. Well, and it was my entire opportunity to have a 3 Jedi setup. I
Yeah.
very rarely brought all 3 or had 2 Jedi with me, or 2 lightsaber users, I should say. But yeah, that was my missed opportunity. But I guess it just means I'll have to go back and play it again at
Yay.
some point in time in the future. But
Put some points into persuasion so you can talk her down.
yeah, I found myself failing horribly, and maybe it's because I also, in the game like this, I put no points into charisma. Like it's just like I totally suboptimal in the way that I build a character here. But um,
Yeah.
so let's um continue on from that point in the story. Then you end up being uh as an adult, as a grown adult, adopted into the Jedi Academy. There's a Rocky style montage of you learning stuff and floating books in the air, um, and then you get sent on a mission to discover the Starforge. Oh well, there's one. There's one on Dantooine. There's a
Star
map
map.
to
Yeah.
star map that will lead to the Starforge, which is we don't really know what that is as of that point, but it has some kind of secret as to why the Sith have this like uh, unstoppable power that they're acquiring, and boy, does that ooze like Mass Effect. Like there's a ton of parallels in story beats. At this point, where did you guys go? Because you kind of have the opportunity to go in a few different directions, a few different places. Did you um where did you go next, Brian?
So the first time I played this game was so long ago, I do not remember. But in my recent play, I went to Kashyyyk, and I don't know why I picked it. Um, I just like Wookiees, I guess. I thought it'd be a cool place to go.
Now the kicker is Zalbar. A chunk of that he's not part of. Like he can't be in the mission with you.
Yeah, I took
Mission
him with
could,
me
but
though.
you,
Yeah,
I,
like
I I I took him in too because I was like, oh, I'm going to use logic would say he's a Wookiee. I'm going to a Wookiee planet. Let's bring in.
and then immediately he's taken away. Yeah.
There's one other point in the game where that happens, where suddenly you don't have somebody, but I don't. There's no other planet that just outright rips somebody away from you for an extended stretch of time.
Yeah, Korriban doesn't technically. I mean, there's sort of the individualized section there.
Yeah, that's true. The trials.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the other options you had Kashyyyk, Tatooine, Manan, which is the like water planet.
Yeah.
And Korriban, which is the location of the Sith Academy, which I saved as the last of those, not not knowing like how things would time out. So it was interesting to go there after knowing some things, and maybe I should I'm gonna throw this warning out now. From this point on, we're gonna go full spoiler because
Okay.
I don't want to dance around the big reveal. So if you haven't played Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, from this point on, we may mention some important plot points. Just know that. I knew who I really was when I went to Korriban, which was really interesting because all the dialogue options were like me threatening them of like, "Do you know who I am?" Um, that it seems like everyone gravitates toward that one moment uh and that reveal. uh how did you feel how did you feel in that moment, Dan? I'm going to ask you first. Like, how did you feel about that reveal, and like has Star Wars done anything since then or prior to then that was like on that level for you?
So it was one of those rare opportunities when the game throws a major plot wrench at you like that, and it really didn't bother me. Especially like even in a light side playthrough, is a little surprising. Like you've been trying to build your character up one way, and you find out that oh, you were actually completely the other way for a chunk of your life. Um, but I think it was done very very elegantly. The actual mechanics of like the reveal and oh well now you get pushed out of the room and you can't deal with the fight and you have to leave, but why not go around the corner? Like that's all fine, happenstance. But the actual surprise there, I thought was really really well done. You could say it's sort of a parallel to what happens in episode 5, right? Again, big reveal, kind of changes your look at the series. Um, Normally in RPGs, I think the big hang up is when you do that, when you do kind of the big twist surprise. The risk there is that it invalidates some of what you've done. I think in KOTOR, it really succeeds in adding context to a lot of what's been happening around you, why some of the principal actors have been a little more evasive, why some are more conflicted than others, because they've been kind of hiding this from you. And I think it goes a long way to sort of this character development, right? It's not you being hit with a surprise and now you have to restructure what you're doing around it because your motives stay the same. It's sort of just restructuring how you're looking at everyone before and after.
Yeah, because there's a few moments on the ship. Um, you've gone on to you've been kind of chasing this Dark Lord Malik, who's the one who annihilated Terrace, and you come to find that you were his master. I'll say it. You were Darth Revan. Um, the
Woo!
Woo Revan, who they've been building up this whole time. Like it's very interesting because you've been catching Revan in these sort of visions, which were just flashbacks. Um, and then Bastila is like, "Oh, you've been having these missions." I found it very interesting that like Karth and Bastila knew,
Mhm.
and and didn't tell you, or like at least Bastila knew. It seems like Karth got his news about that on that ship from the admiral, which was like his admiral. Was it Saul? Is that his
All.
name? Yeah. And so, and then it was very much the like the whisper, and then he turns and he's just like, "What? Are you kidding me?
No.
Like, no way." Um, yeah. Like
It's
I go ahead, Brian.
oh, sorry. I was just gonna say that it's cool because if you when you go back and replay it with this knowledge, you see all the little foreshadowing and little hints that everybody gives about your true identity that when you're playing it the first time you totally buy into like, oh, this is just force visions, or you buy into this idea that you're just some smuggler or whatever that happened to join. And I think it's pretty impressive that they managed to have such a twist, include all of these little clues, but make them so subtle that they all fly under the radar until and then you're like, oh my god, this is what they were talking about,
Yeah.
or like this is what's happening. I think that was really cool. It kind of blew my mind a little bit.
And I've played enough RPGs where there's the one big bad that you're chasing all game, and then you beat them, and then it's like, oh, well, there's this greater big bad behind them that's also important and consequential or whatever, right? Um, so early on, I was just sort of getting the vibe that it was all going to be set up like Malik is going to be the principal antagonist for the game, but then when you defeat Malik, they're going to jump Revan out there like some sort of final boss. So it was a little refreshing in a way to see that reveal too, because it was a little disjointed for me to have both the big bad and this other like this one's the master of the other big bad, and that they were both going by Darth, which in my limited Star Wars knowledge, it was a little weird to have multiple Darth characters in one storyline anyway. So I think that helped kind of reorient in my first playthrough.
I'm still curious. Darth Malik has a very interesting look and build to, especially his facial structure. He's got kind of this metal piece that sort of covers from basically his nostrils down. Yet in the flashbacks, he didn't have that, and they don't ever. At least I never came across like the specific events that led up to that uh, shift. But at one point, you do see him without it, and it was very alarming. It's just like I was like, "How does that man eat?" And I just, uh, I was very very worried. But like, I'd be intrigued to see like, was that a Revan thing? Like, was that an injury taken while he was trying to supplant Revan? Like, um, and I don't think they ever get into it. So we'll just have to let that live in our own headspace, I suppose.
It's not easy for him to eat; he has to force it down.
That's right. I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. Without us just kind of walking through the entire story, what moments from this game did you find like worse among your favorites, be it set pieces or missions um, or something along those lines? Dan, I'm going to throw to
Yeah.
you first on that.
We've mentioned it once or twice already, but Terrace, as it's getting shelled, um, escaping on the Evan Hawk, and then firing the turrets. Like there's that turret mode that you have where you have to shoot the ships as you're escaping, right? You know, that's straight out of the let the player experience the fantasy of that sort of Star Wars dogfight, even if they're doing it, you know, from the turret as opposed to say from like the ship. The later game, the MMO they did, SWTOR, actually gave you sort of that full rail shooter effect. But this gave you sort of that similar to the old Star Wars movies, where the Luke is like jumps into the turret and you know he's shooting the turret while Han's flying. It's sort of the same vibe. It's another callback moment, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, but it was really exciting. And then also, not just the cutscene of seeing all the devastation to Terrace as you're flying away from it, but it gives you a little bit of insight into Malik. You know, he has tremendous resources. He's incredibly malicious, right? He has no regard for the millions of lives he's extinguishing. But he's also a little careless, right? He's imperfect. He doesn't notice everything that's going on. He notices most of what's going on. So I think it sets him up nicely as an imminent threat, as sort of this inevitable evil, but not something that's insurmountable.
This is very simple, but I was really impressed with the opening of the game. The crawl and then the, you know, pan to ship under attack and the music's blaring and there's ships flying everywhere and blasters and this thing gets wrecked and is crashing into the planet. And I was actually like really impressed with that, even though the game is what, like, how old is it? Like 17 years?
2003,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
17 years.
So like in the year, well, I guess I saw this in 2019, but I was still impressed with that opening cinematic for how old that game is. It was also very on brand Star Wars. You know, what I mean, it like kind of had that same opening drama that you get from the movies, and
Yeah,
I thought that was really cool.
for
Kind of
sure.
sets the scene.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan too. I think the opening scene simultaneously sells to the people who want a Star Wars experience. Good news, that's what you're getting. Um, while also giving the player a good chance to get comfortable with all the mechanics of the game, right? It's kind of hard to do that. You don't want to walk into the room and say, "Hi, welcome to Star Wars. Press B to jump, you know, press A to switch weapons or whatever." But at the same time, you do need to get the character or the player familiar with all the ways the game works because it is kind of a complicated game to play. Like you said in your first playthrough, right? It the strangeness that system can turn players off if they're not, you know. So that it's good that they try to set up that first mission in the ship to try to make it one to kind of make players comfortable with the game.
Let me talk a little bit about my moment with Bastila. So Bastila tries to defend you, and then is taken by Malik. Well, you escape, but
Right. Door open.
she's with Malik. You get the blast door closing, which you could totally cut through because that's a thing, and but you don't. And we come to find that she has at one point she has been turned to the dark side, and uh, you have a couple of encounters with her. The final one, which is like she is the sub boss effectively, and I tried to talk her out of it. And I said like there are moments when there's people who go, "Oh, woe is me," and then you say, "It's fine. You can be good again. Like this is okay. Like we'll welcome you back. Come on, take my hand. It'll be all right." And then she doesn't. And so, like the Juhani thing, I had no choice. Like I basically told her at least 4 or 5 times, like, I want you up by my side. Be good. Like you can come back from this. Look I did. and she ultimately makes me strike her down, and I'm just like, well, great. Like I would have loved to have her next to me for the final fight, which as I understand, there's a way to do it.
Yeah.
Um, unfortunately, I did not figure that out.
I did, although I didn't necessarily know what I needed to do to get Bastila to turn. I just remember that I did. Part of that was I'm a bit of an obsessive completionist, so I was making sure that I was picking up as many light side points as possible.
Sure.
And then part of that, again, remember my build was Persuade and Treat Injury. So I had a healthy amount of persuasion going into a lot of those dialogue, options. That makes a load of difference. I think after playing it a couple times, I went back and actually, I think the magic number is like 13 or 15 or something that you want to hit for those. Um, I'm sure people have guides up at this point that will tell you exactly what number you need to meet all of your, I guess, narrative goals game wise. But I think the magic number is somewhere around there. It happened to have it. Um, so because by happenstance, I happened to have what I needed to get the ending I wanted, I did. That does disappoint me a little bit, though. It's frustrating that the game would, behind, I guess, somewhat opaque rules or requirements, make it impossible to have certain characters at the end or have characters end up the way they end up. I think the way you solve that might have been having those consequences happen to an NPC, right? If early on in the game you had seen that failing to say the right things or failing to communicate stuff, would cause people to turn evil or to die in unexpected ways, and it would actually kind of show you like in those, I think they had the little square brackets, and it would say like persuade 5 and then a message or something, right?
Mhm.
That's how you sort of convince a player that it's not a dump stat. It's not something you can avoid, right? That you need to prioritize that somewhat. It's tough, especially because you were playing soldier and you have limited skill points with that compared to if you're playing smuggler. But it is something that unfortunately, from a story perspective, you just have to be a smooth talker. It's not necessarily going to go the way you want it to.
Yeah. I just looked it up. You have to get 15 uh, prompts correct. Like you
Okay,
have to select 15 correct prompts to
Wow.
like and if you're dark side, you don't fight her at all. You fight
right.
additional Jedi. But yeah, so I failed. And it was a sad moment because I went from like this is the character, like she was by my side the whole time, and I'm just like, yes, I'm gonna turn her back. It's gonna be this glorious like moment, and then that happens. I'm just like, I didn't want this. I didn't want this.
But that's still impactful, right?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about it right now. Like
Yeah.
it has stuck with me even more so than fighting Malik himself.
And you make a good point, right? Happy endings aren't always necessarily the most memorable endings or the best endings from a storytelling perspective. I always think of stuff like going completely off base here, the movie The African Queen, where they're all laying on the deck of the ship and they're about to give up and everything seems hopeless and the camera is kind of panning back and you see they're only like 20 or 30 feet from open water. And if the movie ends there, it's a completely different movie than if they miraculously just decide, all right, I'm feeling better, let's keep piloting, and they get to the other side of open waters and then it's a happy ending. It's like if in Gone with the Wind, frankly, my dear, I love you. Let's get married. And instead of
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, the best ending maybe isn't necessarily always the happiest, but KOTOR does a good job of giving you a cohesive ending, regardless of whether it's evil, good, what you want out of it. That because the decisions you make do kind of flow and matter over time. I think one of the things that makes it a satisfying ending, light side or dark side, is that sort of it doesn't jump unexpectedly at the end. It follows what you are trying to achieve is usually kind of what you get out of it. BioWare does a fairly good job of kind of steering you towards your desired endings, or in the case of Mass Effect, coloring your desired endings.
Yeah.
I think it's cool though that a game can make you care about an NPC so much that that moment when you lose them really has an impact on you, and I like probably most people hadn't really heard of BioWare before this game, but then like after this and then um Dragon Age and Mass Effect, it like they got so good at writing such interesting characters that like you really get attached to them. And I think that's super impressive, especially like for a game this old, that they can have that character in the game for so long and so much dialogue and so much interaction and you feel like you get to know them almost. And then, maybe they get snatched away or maybe you redeem them and it's like that build up throughout the entire game makes that moment so much more important. And you don't really get that with many other games or types of games. So I think that's cool that you can be sad that
Yeah.
you didn't save her.
Yeah. That's too bad. Again, motivation to go back and try and right the wrongs and things like that. But yeah, I mean, the beautiful thing is there's so much to this. There's not just light side, dark side. There's tons of choices throughout the whole game that can take you in different directions. There's you can choose. Like I did very little on some of the planets, like the Manon missions. Like there's a lot of side stuff, uh, including a trial, akin to reminding me a little bit of Chrono Trigger, um, that I just talked my way out of, which was strange that I was able to do that because I shouldn't have been able to. Um,
I'm
yeah.
kind of curious. There was one sort of side mission on Dantooine where Jedi asked you to help him solve a murder case, and there's two suspects. Do you guys remember playing through that?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
I'm curious who you picked as the murderer and what the outcome was.
I think
Gosh.
I think I was wrong.
So there was the guy who was in a business with the deceased, and then there was a guy whose wife was cheating on him with the deceased.
Right.
So
It's
there's
Handon and Lusoff?
Rickard, the other one.
Yeah, there you go.
Handon and Rickard.
See, I picked Rickard as the murderer, and it turned out I was wrong. And Handon was the actual murderer, and I let him go. And basically, the the Jedi, I can't remember his name. He was like, let this be a lesson, not to jump to conclusions or whatever. But I have a sneaking suspicion that that quest is written so that no matter what you pick, you're always wrong. And I wanted to kind of verify if that was true or not.
So
It's not.
I can verify for you out of strategy guide itself that you have to come up with a double guilty verdict.
See, I didn't even know that was an option.
Yeah, there's I guess inconsistencies in both of their stories, and you can prove that they're both lying.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember there was both of them were lying at points, but I don't remember there being an option to say both are guilty, but maybe I overlooked it. That's
Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah.
I think that
yes,
option
you are
opens
set
up.
up to fail in that moment,
Yeah.
if you don't have that there.
I think that one opens up based on the dialogue choices you make when you're asking questions to them. Sort
Mhm.
of almost adventure gamey.
There's a moment on Kashyyyk where you have to sort of solve a puzzle, with the hologram on the or on the star map,
Mhm.
and you have to put yourself in the mind of the person who came here before you and unlocked it previously, which was Revan,
Yeah.
which was you, surprisingly. But so as a light side person, I'm like, how would I like? I had to think of how I would answer this as a Sith. Now there's another way you can answer those, and that's to refuse to. I think you can refuse to answer enough times, and eventually he'll just let it. Yeah, there's some other creative ways to deal with Korriban. Like the instructor wants you to betray or wants you to get her alone with the master so that she can take him out.
Right.
Which is again sets up an entire fight based on how that plays out.
Yeah. Whether you kill the apprentice, whether you kill the master, whether you kill both, you can get some interesting dialogue out of him if you, I think, agree to her plan and then go tattle. I think when you get to the final thing, if you defend him, you get some interesting dialogue from him from that. They know who you are, like they figure it out, and they agree to serve you when you become like Sith Lord again. When you rebuild yourself as, Darth Vader, or whatever, like there's a way to basically get them to swear fealty to you.
Oh, that's
So
pretty cool. That's
yeah.
pretty. That's great. I did want to give some acknowledgement to a couple of people who had some thoughts from the community. So I do want to mention, I threw this out on Twitter today that we were recording tonight. I got a couple of comments. One of them from, I basically just asked, like, tell me what you thought about the game. And so from one, which was Stumptown Retro, who said, it's a game I play annually due to its well-written stories, characters, and environmental that sets us far enough away from the films that it allows for completely different themes and elements that didn't have to tie into anything already done. It's brilliant. And the other came from Church, the game grinder, who played along this month as well. So thank you for playing along with Prime Church. And he said, it's BioWare, so of course it's excellent, and leave it to them to do the best Star Wars. I felt more on the Neverwinter Dragon Age side rather than the Mass Effect, but this was that era. So, again, thank you to both of them for taking the time to voice some opinions there. Have any other beefs with this game, or are we just overall in a good spot and we all really like KOTOR?
Yeah, not many. I do like it for the most part. I would say I'm a little disappointed it hasn't been in 2020 really fully mastered and resolved in a way that's completely bug free or completely crash free. Um, we had issues when we were going to play it for Ion Gaming on Xbox, and we were having some issues there. And then I tried to bring it up on my own PC to play it, and the Steam version I was having issues with. So it's one of those things where at this point I'd love to have it fixed, but I mean, they put such ridiculous effort into getting this thing out in the first place. I mean, it was in development since I want to say like they were planning it in 1999 and started working on it in 2000. And for the 3 years they were working on it, um, it was a massive workload that they were undertaking. The boss fight book on it goes into a lot of detail on the work conditions. So the last thing I want is to put them through even more work to get it out there. What did get released was terrific, but it was a shame that it's just unfortunate that those bugs were there. Um, Otherwise, no. I mean, the D20 system was the best system they had on hand at the time that was sort of recognizable and licensable because Wizards of the Coast did license out the D20 system to people that wanted to use it. Um, and it was interesting because they came from a board game background. Like a bunch of the characters in KOTOR are based off of tabletop characters that the lead designer for KOTOR, it was Karth, Bastila, Mission, and someone else are all like actually based off tabletop characters and games they were playing. So D20 seems like a natural fit, but it's not the most balanced system in the world. It's one of those systems that third edition had so many min-max opportunities that they turned around and did 3.5, and that's really the only time I remember someone going so far as to canonically come up with like a whole different decimal for a D&D system. You kind of had first edition, second edition, third edition, 3.5 to try to work out some of the kinks. And then even Pathfinder, which Paizo buys,
Mhm.
D20 and works with it to essentially make 3.75 or whatever you want to call what Pathfinder is now, and then fourth and fifth. So D20's kind of wonkiness, its own foibles. I guess you have to place those on the lap of this game since they chose to use the system. But it's not the worst thing in the world, and it does make it so that if you are comfortable doing that theory crafting, that there are more than ample opportunities to kind of make a broken character, whether you want to play melee, ranged, or caster.
I'd say my only complaints about the game are based on my modern viewpoint. They're not necessarily faults with the game, but things that I've become accustomed to with modern gaming. I really would have loved more frequent autosaves because I found myself saving after every fight and after every lengthy discussion because I didn't want to have to do it again if I died. And as we discussed before, some of the fights were pretty hard, so it wasn't even in the very beginning of the game. It wasn't that uncommon to die, and it just kicks you back out to the main menu, and it's like, well, good luck loading wherever you saved last. So from my modern perspective, I'd liked a lot more auto saves. um I think that's really it. Like, basically, in my most recent playthrough, I was pausing the game to save every 5 minutes because I was too
Yeah.
lazy to have to replay something. Um, but I have no complaints about the game. From the point of view of the time period it was made in. I think it's great. Like, I didn't run into any bugs personally, other than a couple of little, get stuck on some geometry for a second, and that's not a big deal. So yeah, I think it's a pretty solid game.
Fantastic. Yeah, I agree with the saving. But yeah, I think you guys summed it up
I think I
pretty
got
well.
one more beef.
Sure.
Nobody's fault, but I think there was another planet. I forgot who told me this. They were working on one additional planet they had to cut that was supposed to be a hut planet that was all based around like gladiatorial combat, which makes sense because the movie Gladiator had just come out in 2000. So it was, contemporary to when they were developing the game, but they were supposed to have this like gladiatorial arena as one of the planets. And I really would have joined that just personally because I always like the Colosseums in the Final Fantasy games, or the Deep Dungeon and Tactics, or any of those sort of bonus challenge, like really test your combat skill locations. Obviously, you could have some interesting story beats there. But just a numbers RPG guy would have been fun to try different builds in a sort of one-on-one combat thing like that.
Do they? Is there the ability to respec? Like, can you respec in this?
I don't think so. Let me look that up. I don't think you can actually.
I mean, because those two things would go hand in hand, then, right? If you could respec and then go into that type of combat scenario.
There's a mod for it, which I think implies maybe you can't by default.
Okay. Because there is a very early combat arena type thing in Taurus, but you're barely accustomed to the game at that point.
Hmm.
Uh, and you get an item that you get items that I don't think are very long term usable, right? It's like, great, good job, you
And
Yeah,
managed to.
it's just so you can earn a few credits, right?
Mhm.
To buy a few things. But yeah, I think you're right. It would have been cool to have something a little more challenging later on.
Yeah. Now I think my one beef, and then we can kind of, I think we'll probably call it a show. Is I feel like, and they fixed this with the second game, and they fixed it with Mass Effect as well. Like the whole binary aspect to good and evil is a little convenient. The fact that light side and dark side points are uh, almost a currency, and they cancel each other out, I feel is a little strange. Like there's not enough gray area, I think, in those.
SWOTOR has you can be Sith or a Republic, and light side or dark side. So you could be like a light side member of the Empire or a dark side member of the Republic, but they're not separate in KOTOR. Now, I mostly agree with you. Star Wars as a vehicle tends to have a pretty flat binary good and evil, right? It always kind of casts itself that way.
Hmm.
Mechanically, it's a little boring after a while, and it becomes fairly easy to pick out what option you need to pick to get your desired,
Right.
cookie of choice. Um, the second one does have that neutral character sort of driving a lot of the story, which I think has a lot to do with making it more nuanced. Um, I probably would have liked KOTOR 2 more if it had been finished. KOTOR 1 does steer you very, I guess, it's sort of on rails to a point once you kind of decide what way you want to go with it. So, yeah, there's not a lot of, I guess, heavier lessons learned morality. But in terms of feeling like a good Star Wars clone, it does kind of have that satisfying conclusion, whether you're going to try to take over the galaxy or save it.
I would agree with you, and I'd kind of tack on. For me personally, for whatever reason, I don't know why, I cannot bring myself to be a jerk, even in a video game. So I always play the good guy, the Boy Scout. Um, and part of the problem I think that reinforces that behavior is that the dark side options are like so dark. It's like I can either say, "Hey, I'm here to help," or "I'm going to kill you." There's like like can't I be like, maybe not the greatest guy, but not just a mass murderer? Like give me some options in the middle there somewhere, then maybe I could expand the range that I'm comfortable with. So yeah, that is maybe one other thing that I'd add as a complaint is just the some of the dark side options are just like comically evil. Like it would just be almost funny to pick them if I didn't feel such like a jerk about it.
Yeah, it's true. They really don't have a lot of oxygen in the room for antihero in KOTOR, and where it does exist in the text, you tend to get dark side points for picking it. Um, when the opportunity does come up, or because the writer for that particular, quest decided, well, the dark side option, just because the stakes of this particular thing might be less heavy than others, right? Find something, give it back to someone, or keep it, Um, it feels like the consequences are too stark, right? It's oh well, I picked something off the ground that I knew belongs to somebody, but I kept it. So, especially there's sort of a curve that happens with light side and dark side. If you're farther up on those curves one way or the other, and you pick something that goes the other way, you drop down or move up more precipitously, right? So even in late game, if you pick one wrong dialogue option, it feels like you're losing 4 or 5 light side or dark side points towards that, mastery of that side, and then you're slogging your way back with multiple choices to get back there. Do we mention the music?
I briefly mentioned that it's familiar. Um,
Because it's a questionable topic to go into.
you think? Let me hear your thoughts then. Yeah, let's hear your thoughts on the music, and we'll
So,
and use that as kind of the
well, okay, so on the one hand, it really does capture that John Williams vibe. And to great effect. On the other hand, I have a little trouble getting too jazzed up to hear it. I really liked both this soundtrack and the Morrowind soundtrack. They're both Jeremy Soule soundtracks,
Mhm.
right? And in the last year, um, it's been a thing. We're kind of in this position now where you're trying to separate, the work, the artist from the work, and all that, and so it is challenging. I did when I was watching the Let's Plays the last time I was going through and consuming KOTOR. The music was on. I was listening to it. I was enjoying it. It's great nostalgia, great memories and stuff. But yeah, that's a thing. I do need to go back and reread the boss fight book. You mentioned Caleb had done a review on it.
Mhm.
I'll have to catch that as well. But I am curious, I guess, kind of a state of play thing before and after for a lot of the people involved in making this.
Yeah. I I think with the music, the one thing when you have music that is tied to combat and then the music lets up, um, when it doesn't let up and you're just like, where is it? Where is it? What's happening? Like sometimes that can pull you out a little bit. Um, but overall, I would agree that it does a good job to kind of fit the mold, and it it doesn't feel out of place um, to me at all.
I don't really have strong opinions about the music. I did think that it sounded appropriately Star Wars. I did, however, and I did not know that Jeremy Soule did this, but I think it was maybe on Dantooine. I was like, this music sounds like it's straight from Morrowind or maybe Oblivion or something. Like it sounded so familiar to me. I don't know if it just happened to be similar or if he actually used the same track in multiple games. I don't know if you're allowed to do that, but like other than that weird thing, the music was appropriate to the point that I never questioned it. I was just like, this is good.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
it sounds like Star Wars, right?
do you guys have any other final thoughts or final comments that you wanted to make, or shall we wrap up?
Well, I would say if you're not averse to cheating, you can get Darth Malik's lightsaber, and it's +5 attack, +5 damage, and a 17 to 20 crit range. Um, so if for any reason you find yourself struggling in the game and you're not averse to popping open the console and typing something in, that's a really fun weapon to swing around.
I would just say that I loved this game and the sequel. I didn't I didn't know about how KOTOR 2 had some development issues until after I had played it, but I still enjoyed it. I was really disappointed in the Old Republic, the MMO, because I love these two games so much and I felt like that one was so different. I'd really like them to bring back this single player version of it. Give us a third one.
That'd be great. You just remaster the first two in the process, and
There
uh,
you go.
yeah. I will say that if you haven't played this yet, and if you've listened to us this whole time, like my best recommendation, uh, yes, you can find it on Steam, you can find it on iOS, like it's on everything for the most part. The backwards compatibility on Xbox One with this is fantastic, um, and the visual upgrade is beautiful. Like especially some of the worlds really pop. The unknown planet that you're on toward the end of the game. Even Tatooine looks great, even with the sand getting everywhere, and like it's just really well done. And I mean, it shows how well this game holds up over all these years. So play it, absolutely. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. Appreciate you being on. Again, on behalf of the club and the other hosts of CC Prime, I want to thank both Brian and Dan for joining us today to talk about Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Brian, where are the best places that people can find you and your content?
I am on Twitter at HokeyBriz, and I'm on the OffKillter podcast. That's off hyphen kilter with two L's. And you can find that pretty much anywhere. And you can always go to polykill.com to see everything else.
Good. Dan, what's ahead for Winterion Game Studios, and where else can people find you and your content?
So we just posted our season 4 recap. It's where we kind of go over everything we did this year, what we're looking forward to playing what next year. Hold a little in memoriam for the bosses we defeated along the way. We probably won't have anything out for a few weeks, which means it's the perfect time to jump back in if you haven't seen it. It's all available at youtube.com/Winterion Game Studios if that's Too hard to find, just go to winterion.com. There's a link there. You can also find me at Twitter at winterion.
Very good. And then for me, you can find me on Twitter at Musty Hobbit. And I also do make a point of streaming the game of the month almost every month on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Musty Hobbit. So with this, we close out another episode of the Cartridge Club. For the month of January, Cartridge Club Prime is playing Castle of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse, available on the Sega Genesis, Master System, and the Game Gear. If you enjoyed this show, you should also take a moment to listen to our sister podcast, Cartridge Club Portable. January for CC Portable is mobile month, and with the community and listeners focusing on games exclusive to mobile platforms such as Super Mario Run and more. And lastly, the Quick Save Club will be getting all kinds of sneaky by playing Thief, the Dark Project for January. To those of you who are interested in supporting the club beyond a review on the podcast app of your choice, I'd like to mention that the Cartridge Club Prime Portable and our website are entirely funded by pledges made by members of our community. We're extremely grateful to those supporters, and if you're interested in becoming one of them, please look into how you can do that at patreon.com/Cartridge Club. We look forward to hearing from you sometime real soon. DC Unite.